Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today at this webinar about CIRA's 2024 grants application process. My name is Caitlin, and I'm grants coordinator at CIRA.
Welcome. I'm Maureen James, Manager of Community Investment Program at CIRA, and we'd like to start by acknowledging that we're speaking to you today from the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, whose presence here reaches back to time immemorial, the city colonially known as Ottawa. Right now, we do have our cameras on, but for the remainder of the presentation, we're going to turn them off until we get to the question period so that you can focus on the details of the presentation. Interesting. Somehow, my control panel has disappeared. Oh, here we go. Turning my camera off now. Okay, so this webinar is for people interested in preparing a grant for our 2024 funding call, which is open until 2 p.m. Eastern Time on April 10th. A recording of this webinar will be available next week, probably even by the end of this week, on YouTube and posted on CIRA's website. To get started, we have a few logistical details. Given that there are so many people participating today, you are muted. So we'll ask that you type your questions in the right-hand panel, the control panel, and we'll make sure to answer them at the end of the presentation. If you can't see the control panel to ask questions, there is an orange arrow that helps you expand it. So if you're having any trouble accessing the questions panel during this session, please don't hesitate to just send us an email to grants@cira.ca and we will respond after this session. I'll hand it over to Caitlin now.
So here's our agenda for today: about CIRA and Net Good, what we fund, project eligibility, preparing your submission, applying for a grant, the application review process, top mistakes for applicants to avoid, and finally, we'll have time for questions at the end. Our organization is CIRA, the Canadian Internet Registration Authority, based in Ottawa, Ontario. We are best known for our role managing more than 3 million .ca domains on behalf of all Canadians. We also offer related cybersecurity products and services. CIRA's goal is to ensure a trusted internet for all Canadians. CIRA is a not-for-profit organization. With the revenue we generate through .ca domains and cybersecurity services, we choose to fund community-led internet projects across Canada. Each year we have over $1 million in funding available, and we fund up to $100,000 per grant. This is our 11th year running the program, and since 2014 we've funded 217 projects with $11.7 million. Next, I'll talk about the types of projects we fund and give you some examples of each. Our three funding areas are infrastructure, online safety, and policy engagement. To give you an idea of which area means, infrastructure projects involve community-led connectivity research, network planning, and solutions. We emphasize that projects must be community-led and community-owned. Online safety projects involve research, educational frameworks, tools, consultations, and training programs to increase online safety against common threats like misinformation, online harms, privacy intrusion, harassment, cyberbullying, and gender-based violence, for example. And finally, policy engagement projects can involve events, research, and policy ecosystem work that broadens public awareness, understanding, and engagement in internet policy and governance. Here are some examples of infrastructure projects we funded in recent years. Deploying upgraded wireless infrastructure that provides access to low Earth orbit technology for remote communities in Nunavut. Connecting homes and buildings to existing coaxial community lines in an Indigenous community. And building a solar-powered radio tower to connect a remote BC region to Wi-Fi and cellular service. For our infrastructure projects, we require that they are community-led and owned. A connectivity project where their main provider is a major telecom company like Rogers, for example, would not be eligible. For online safety, we have funded a lab facility for IT students at a college in New Brunswick to practice detecting and addressing cybersecurity attacks and threats. A toolkit for K-12 educators across Canada to address privacy and digital safety risks associated with AI and machine learning experienced by Northern, rural, and Indigenous communities. A youth-led citizens' assembly on children's online safety that will inform Canadian policymakers on how best to protect and empower children online. And finally, some examples of policy engagement projects. Resources and tools to support BC First Nations leadership bodies to advance digital equity in their communities. A research report on digital equity and internet affordability across low-income communities in Canada. Empowering Indigenous connectivity advocates to directly connect with policymakers through a targeted policy engagement training model. For more examples of the types of projects we fund, we recommend checking out our website. To mark the 10-year anniversary of our grants program, we put together this new page about its history. It also has a map you can check out with markers for each project we've funded. You can click on the marker for details and hit the red button to learn more about the project. You can also view a complete list of the projects we funded on our website and search by year, funding area, or location. We recommend checking out past projects because as part of your application, we do ask you to indicate how your project is unique from projects we've funded in the past.
I'll talk to you about project eligibility, and I do hope we don't keep experiencing the drops in connection that we had during the first portion. We are monitoring the questions to see if that is continuing to come up, and we'll certainly post a revised recording of this if we need to afterwards. So let me talk now about project eligibility. Who can apply for funding at CIRA? There are 4 types of organizations that are eligible to apply: nonprofit organizations, registered charities, Indigenous communities, and academics that are working at a Canadian college or university. Within that grouping, our program prioritizes funding projects that benefit Northern, rural, and/or Indigenous communities and/or students from kindergarten to grade 12 and post-secondary. So we look for projects that benefit these groups in a meaningful way, where beneficiaries ideally are directly involved in the project design, delivery, execution, and involvement at the end. So when you're thinking about your eligibility, think about, am I targeting these communities? We also talk about what we don't fund, what's not eligible. So there are specific groups or organizations that we don't fund. For example, we don't fund schools directly. Libraries sometimes are incorporated as nonprofits, not always, and so those are questionable, but check if you are registered as a nonprofit. We also don't fund municipalities or small businesses. Only entities that are constituted as a nonprofit, charity, Indigenous community, or university or college. So keep that in mind. And Caitlin, your screen is showing 2 versions of the slide, like two, yeah, perfect. Okay, we also have certain activities that we don't fund. There's quite a list here, and you can read it in depth. We don't fund projects that focus on delivering an online service, such as building an app or an online platform or a website. We assume you already have those, that those things are already well developed in communities, and we take it a little bit beyond. We also don't fund end user equipment for individual use, for web design projects, or generic IT training. Some other funding restrictions include if you have substantial travel expenses, fundraising, core operations, or retrospective costs. We don't fund marketing or research costs or projects that are focused outside of Canada. And we also don't fund projects where more than 25% of the budget is equipment. The one exception to that rule is infrastructure projects, where often that is the lion's share of the budget, or it may be equipment, but otherwise up to 25% is acceptable. So that is what we don't fund. And to bring that to life, we have some examples of real-life ineligible projects that we receive as ideas from organizations. Often people will run their idea by us before they apply. These are examples of ones that did not pass eligibility requirements, and they are important projects on their own, but the main reasons that they aren't funded is because they don't align with CIRA's specific funding areas or the target beneficiaries, or they might fall under one of our funding restrictions. So here are some examples. A nonprofit organization looking to upgrade their financial systems and software. We fund infrastructure around connectivity, but not software and services specific to an individual organization. Another example, an elementary school wanting to develop a program for Indigenous students to learn how to carve canoes through an online training program. However, schools are not eligible in our case, and online training of a particular topic that isn't related to online safety, policy engagement, or infrastructure wouldn't be eligible because it doesn't align with our funding areas. A nonprofit food network wanting to develop a website about food security. Food security is an incredibly important issue, but the website part, that is not something that we fund. It doesn't align with our funding areas or the beneficiaries, so we don't fund websites. A charity looking to integrate community water data into an online resource. Again, another really useful project, but we don't fund online services, and it doesn't align with our funding areas. And finally, charity wanting to fund a digital citizenship award for graduating high school students, which is great, but it doesn't align with our funding areas. In particular, I think one way this project could potentially is if the project were focused on online safety and a small award was part of the project, but not as the focus of the project. So that gives you a sense of some real life examples of things that we weren't able to consider funding. So now let's take a look at the schedule. There's some key dates to be aware of. The application period has opened last Friday, and it closes absolutely on April 10th at 2 p.m. We emphasize the Eastern time. We emphasize the time zone because we have applicants across the country and our online system does not accept late applications. It shuts down automatically at the 2 p.m. Eastern deadline. So make sure you know what time that is in your time zone. Every year we have people who miss applying because they get time zones mixed up. So don't let that happen to you. From March 1st till April 10th, we review applications on an ongoing basis until that 2 p.m. deadline. After the 2 p.m., we don't accept applications any further. So that's the main thing we want to emphasize at this moment is to get your application in early. And here's why. When your application is submitted into our online system, CIRA staff review it to ensure it's eligible, complete, and we will send you a follow-up email if anything is missing or incorrect. Typically, 50%, half of the applications submitted require some adjustment before they can be accepted. Some of the reasons for this include missing documentation, sections left blank in the application form, issues with the budget. So there's a lot of fine detail information that goes into this, and we want to make sure that you've got it all together in a way that the evaluation panel can review it effectively. So we look at those as they're coming in, send stuff back to you. So watch your email for anything from us during this time period. Up until 2 p.m. on April 10th, you will have the opportunity, if you get that email, to correct your application and send it back to us. Anything missing after that deadline, though, and your application would be rejected as it's been sent back to you for corrections. If no corrections arrive and we review them again, you wouldn't be able to move forward in the process. On the happy note that your application does pass the eligibility review, it moves on to review by CIRA's grants evaluation panel. If your project is selected for funding, you would receive a letter from us in July outlining requirements for receiving the grant. So for planning purposes, your project should start no earlier than July. And by that, we mean the portion that you need CIRA's funding for shouldn't start any earlier than July. So now that we've gone over the types of projects we fund and the materials you need to include in your application, it's helpful to ask yourself these eligibility questions before applying for a grant. Are you applying on behalf of a nonprofit, a charity, an Indigenous community, or are you an academic? Does your project fall into one of the three funding areas: infrastructure, online safety, or policy engagement? Third, does your project benefit people in northern, rural, or Indigenous communities, or students from kindergarten to grade 12 or post-secondary students? And fourth, we're about to talk about the materials you will need to include in your submission. So do consider, do you have access to all of these documents? And especially one that will emphasize 3 letters of support from the community members. So if you do have all of these things, you would be ready to move on to applying. And Caitlin will tell us about, oh no, she won't, it's me. We'll discuss everything that goes into preparing your submission. Here we go. So a good place to start is the sample application form on our website. It has an exact replica of what you'll find in our online system. So you can read what we're expecting. You can view all the questions, including the word counts. We provide explanations throughout the form to clarify what is being asked of you with each question. And you can also download the project budget template at this place on our website. Some people actually keep the sample application form as a guide to draft their responses offline in another document. So maybe you open up Word, put all the questions in, and then, especially if you have a wacky internet connection, which seems like we've had a bit of today, you can cut and paste your responses from your Word document straight into the online application system a little more quickly. So if you have a poor internet connection, that might be a way to approach it. But our online system, when you're putting the information in, does save it to the point where you've entered information. So there are several documents required for a full submission. And all of what I'm about to say is on our website, CIRA.ca/grants. But this is kind of the area where applicants seem to need the most direction, or where we find the most errors when we do the eligibility review. So here we go. Everyone, regardless of what kind of organization you're from, must submit a completed application form. When you submit the completed application form, the online portal tells you which specific tasks you then need to do. So depending on the type of organization you are, if you're applying on behalf of a nonprofit, charity, or Indigenous community, these are the documents that you will need to provide. First of all, you must provide proof of eligibility. So examples of proof can include documentation that confirm your charitable status, your operating number for your nonprofit, or your incorporation documents. So something that shows that you are an organization, that it exists and the government knows about you. We look for a board of directors with contact information, including organizations, titles, phone numbers, or emails, or the leadership in your band council, that kind of information about who's in charge. The next thing we look for is your most recent audited financial statements. So that would be 22 or later. But if you don't have audited financial statements, we will accept statements. They have to be like a profit and loss statement that have been reviewed by an accountant and signed by 2 members of your board. A tax return is not a financial statement and will not be accepted. We look for your 2024 operating budget. So that should clearly show the year, and an operating budget shows your planned revenue and expenses for the activities in the current year. So you probably already have a 2024 budget if you operate in a January to December year, or you may have to put one together based on your fiscal year, but we'll be looking for the 2024 operating budget. And for our purposes, we need it to cover the period January to December 24 at a minimum. Really important next item is your detailed project budget sheet. We'll go into more detail on that because there are a lot of specific things we look for. And new for this year's grant call, we are asking for 3 letters of support from community members you expect to benefit from your project. And so that's something that if you're thinking about applying, might be the thing that takes the longest. So you could consider getting started on that soon. We'll go into more detail on the project budget and the slides, and the community letters in just a moment. We'll switch our focus now to universities and colleges, which have different requirements. Again, you fill in your application form, and then the accompanying documentation that's required is a letter confirming that the lead researcher is employed by the academic institution, a CV for the lead researcher, a detailed project budget sheet, like always, and then you'll also, again, need to provide the 3 letters of community support. So those are the tasks that would be assigned to anybody applying from a university or college. All of this information is submitted through our online application system. And these are the materials that we check internally for completeness and eligibility before your application can be moved forward for further review. So given that 50% of the applications that come in need corrections or additions often in these documents, we do encourage you to apply well in advance of the April 10th deadline. There's no need to provide any additional documentation beyond what is requested. The panel will receive and review only the application form and documents requested in the system. Okay, those letters of community support. We did have this requirement last year, and it's been increased to 3 letters of community support because it's really important to CIRA and the panel that makes decisions on which organizations get funded that there is community engagement in your project, that the community wants it, knows about it, will benefit from it, and that they know how. So we ask for these letters because they're meant to show that you're engaged with community partners or participants who will benefit from your project. They can tell the story behind why a grant is needed, what needs were articulated by the people your project will serve that encouraged you to develop that project. They should show us that you have developed relationships that will help the project succeed. So we have some examples of community members that could provide a letter, and they include teachers or parents that will benefit, for example, from tools and training if your project is an online safety one, residents or business associations in a community that will benefit from infrastructure upgrades and connectivity improvements to high-speed internet, any partner organizations that will be involved in the project delivery, or letters associated from people associated with your organization, like that. Actually, sorry, this is an exclusion. Letters from people associated with your organization, like staff or board members, don't qualify, and they will not be accepted. So it's got to be people external to your organization. So here's some examples of the kinds of community letters that we've received. One is a band council resolution approving of and supporting the initiative to expand connectivity in an Indigenous community. So that's a great example of consultation and engagement. A letter from an Indigenous literacy organization that will co-develop online safety training materials for teachers of Indigenous students, so a partner organization. A letter from a different partner organization providing support, installing and delivering wireless access in a remote college campus. Or finally, a letter from a school board that will benefit from an online safety educational program being developed for elementary school students in their catchment area. So those are examples. There's many, many more, and I'm sure you'll come up with great ones. And then we get into the other fun, detailed element, the project budget sheet. It's a really important part of your application. It gets close scrutiny. So we'll give you a bit of an overview of what should go into it and then some tips on how to make sure it's complete. So the Excel template that we use for laying out the budget can be downloaded from our website or the online application system. So it's available there. You download it, fill it out, and then upload it with your application. On your budget, the total revenue must match the total expenses. We often see applicants making errors with their revenues and expenses not matching, which can result in an application being sent back to the applicant for revision. And in that case, it's fine if the budget is bigger than what you're asking for from CIRA for funding. In fact, that's encouraged. CIRA always likes to see multiple sources of funding, but you do need to show the specific CIRA expenses within the context of the overall project. So all of those things have to add up if you've got multiple sources, revenue, and expenses. You do need to show the specific line items you're requesting from CIRA. And if you have other contributors, if you know already what they're funding, great. Sometimes you don't and you're still in the process of fundraising, but show what other funding is being looked for. The financial request from CIRA must be in line with your organization size and capacity. So please be realistic about the amount you're requesting and the scope of your project. We appreciate when you include estimates and quotes for equipment or items to be purchased where possible. Particularly for infrastructure projects, this has proved really useful. The evaluation panel that reviews the applications wants to see how you arrived at the expenses that you're putting in the budget. Please also show any in-kind revenue or expenses that your organization is able to make. So if you're devoting office space or other kinds of contributions to this, you can note those as a revenue line. There is an option to allocate up to 15% of your grant towards administration support. And that to us means the overhead costs of delivering the project. So management, rent, various other items, but they would have to be portioned out so that they can't be more than 15% of the project. And we also have example budgets for the first time this year included in the template form so that you'll be able to see how some other projects have broken out and given detail on their budgets, one for each type of project. Now, tips for successful budgets. The first one is lump sums are questioned. So if you put $35,000 for equipment, that will be questioned, and the panel doesn't like those. And so they go, nah, we need more detail than that. What exactly is the equipment? So break down expenses, like through a cost per item or unit cost. So for example, 24 Ethernet switches at $1,458 each does equal maybe around 35,000. I haven't done the math, but sounds good to me. That kind of breakdown is what we're looking for. And if you have quotes and estimates that you used to develop your budget, ideally supply them with your application, or you may be asked to provide these later. Again, the evaluation panel is keen to know how you arrived at the numbers you put. If your total project budget is greater than the amount being requested from CIRA, by all means, that is fine. Just please show the other sources of funding you are seeking or have already confirmed, and include any in-kind expenses from your own organization. They like to see that an organization is also committing into the delivery of the project where possible. You can include staff costs as long as they are directly related to the project delivery. So for example, if you're doing a policy project, you may need 0.6 FTE of a policy director, 60% of their time over in the project for 12 months. So they're directly involved in delivering the project. Staff, those kinds of staff costs are allowed. You are welcome to include up to 15% of your CIRA funding request as administration support. So for example, if you're requesting 100,000, the maximum from CIRA, the amount of administration support may be no more than 15,000. In that case, the rest of all of your CIRA related expenses would total no more than 85,000. And that's an option. Some people just request part of it, some don't at all because they have other ways of covering those kinds of costs. So it's up to you to choose. Some prioritize requesting funding for hard costs, more the project delivery costs, but it really depends on the situation. So that's optional for you. If you do choose to budget it, it is meant to cover things such as rent, utilities, managerial oversight, accounting, insurance, but be specific and provide a breakdown of the costs you expect it to apply to. You can put that in the notes. So with a budget that's taking all of that into account, I know the evaluation panel will be really impressed. Caitlin, application steps.
Yeah, next I'll discuss how you actually apply for a grant. So applications are submitted online at cipapplication.cira.ca through an application platform we've customized with SurveyMonkey Apply. You can go directly to the site address, or it's also linked on our website. If you've never applied for a CIRA grant before, you will be new to the system, so you can register using that big red button on the upper right to create your account. If you've applied before, your account will still be in the system, so you can log in using the same credentials. If you've forgotten your password, you can reset it. Once you've logged in and started a new application, you'll see a list of tasks to complete, including the application form, which is the first step. Once you submit the application form, you'll be given more tasks to complete depending on your type of organization. Once you've completed a task, click Mark as Complete to save it. When the task has been completed, you'll see a green check mark next to it. And finally, once you've completed all the tasks, press Submit. This is the most important step. As we said, the deadline for applying is 2 p.m. Eastern Time on April 10th. And you must submit your application before then, and we cannot accept late applications. Believe it or not, some applicants last year actually missed this step, so their application was never submitted. Even after they uploaded all of the documents and completed the form, they never hit submit. So please hit that big red submit button by the deadline in order for your application to be considered. Next, I'll go into what happens after an application is submitted and the review process. So once you've submitted an application, you will receive an automatic email confirming it was received. However, that doesn't mean your project is eligible. It just means that it has been received by the system. There are 2 phases of review once you've submitted. The first step is the internal review. CIRA staff review the application for completeness and eligibility and follow up within 2 days requesting any additional information, but we'll usually follow up much sooner than that. At least 50% of applications, as we said, have needed some follow-up, like errors in the budget sheet or incomplete or incorrect documentation. We will get back to you if any corrections are needed, and they must be submitted by April 10th at 2 p.m. Please be on the lookout for follow-up messages from us, as they frequently get caught in spam filters. And it is your responsibility to make any corrections to your application before the deadline on April 10th. After the deadline, applications will not be accepted. The panel will be evaluating projects with these criteria: beneficiaries, project plan, community support, outcomes and sustainability, and budget. Each application is given a score out of 100. As you can see in the table, project plan and community support are both worth the most points, 25 each. We can't predict for sure what will happen in any given year, but we usually receive over 100 applications each year. And due to this high demand and our limited funding, we are normally only able to fund fewer than 20% of the projects submitted. To give you an idea of that, last year we funded 16 projects out of over 100 applications. So that's why it's key to make sure your project aligns with these criteria for the best chance of receiving funding. If your application was moved forward for review and scoring, you will hear the results from CIRA in July. And now Maureen.
Hi, so is that enough information in this webinar and on our website to make sure you will not make the mistakes that we're going to tell you to avoid? We hope we've shared that, but we're going to do a quick little summary of common mistakes applicants make. All of these mistakes can result in your application being sent back for corrections or your application not being funded at all. So the bullet points are not coming up yet. Caitlin, is there a aha? Thank you. Okay, so the best chances of receiving funding, make sure you're not doing any of the following. The first is not checking alignment. That is probably the #1 reason that applications are ineligible for funding. Make sure your project aligns with our funding areas and target beneficiaries. And we've gone through a number of examples, and there's so much content on our website for you to refer to about the types of things that we do fund. The next thing to avoid is an insufficient or an unrealistic project plan. Make sure your plan has enough detail and that the scope of your project is in line with the capacity of your organization. So break it down into chunks and what you're going to have achieved and what's realistic within, so that people get a concrete sense of what you will be doing to achieve your overall goals. It's, as we mentioned, really important to show community involvement in your project, and you must provide those 3 letters of community support from the people that will benefit from your project, not from your staff or board members. So that is probably where you should put some attention pretty early on. Your budget sheet, we went over that. Fill it out correctly, include specific breakdowns of costs, and provide quotes and estimates if you have them. Please check your email. Keep an eye on it, because we're not quite sure that your system is going to recognize messages coming from our system. And we don't want you to miss any of those emails where we say, hey, this looks like a good project, but you're missing X, right? So when we find issues to correct, you'll get an email from our application system. So keep an eye on your spam filter, your junk, because in the day or two right after you submit your application, that is when we're going to be looking at those things. Probably the most important takeaway, if you haven't heard it already, please apply early. The deadline of 2 p.m. on April 10th is quite a ways away. You have lots of time to give us your first round of submission, get everything in together, and that gives us time to give you feedback. So do yourself a favor, prepare your application now, get your community support letters, don't wait until the last minute. And my final piece of advice based on what Caitlin last said, press submit. Do not forget to press submit, because that's heartbreaking. All right, I think that brings us to the moment where we get to dig into all of the questions that have been piling up while we've been doing this rundown. So the best way to reach us, if you have questions after this webinar and after reading our website, is grants@cira.ca. Do drop us an email. We'll be happy to try to help out. You can also, once you're in the system using SurveyMonkey apply, if you're having technical problems, they are probably best positioned to help you with any technical help on your application. So that information is available on the site when you log in. But of course, if you're really stuck, don't hesitate to reach out to us. And now I think we are ready for questions. We will put our cameras back on because we've been missing you. Interesting that it's gone to the, oh, there we are. All right, so I know there was a little bit of trouble with the audio at the beginning. We'll play it back to ourselves, and if we think it needs a re-record at the beginning, we will take care of that. But in the meantime, let's go through the questions. The first one I see is, when you say community-led, can it be a nonprofit organization led by 2 founders? We are in a growth period of trying to expand our board. Absolutely. A nonprofit sometimes is no actual staff. There can be volunteers, as long as you're incorporated and you represent some community that needs some kind of internet project that relates to what CIRA funds. That should work. So that is no problem. Are we able to apply if we received funding last year? And if so, can we apply for continuing the program? This is a question that comes up a lot, actually. So if you received funding last year or even in prior years, as long as your project is finished, reported, completely signed off by us, like we've done all the checking and back and forth, and you're finished, closed, done, yes, you could apply for a new grant. We don't do ongoing funding specifically described that way. What we would do is a new phase of the project. So we don't just say, hey, that was a great project, keep going, here's $100,000. That doesn't happen. What would happen is you would apply to us for a new set of activities that are sufficiently different from what you were funded for before. And that's because we are not a core funder. We are a project funder. So projects tend to be about a year in length. That's our ideal. They can be shorter. A year is great for us, a little bit longer, but we try to stay away from any projects longer than that. So keep that in mind also. I know that was a question that came up. Caitlin, I'll throw you this one. Do you fund digital literacy programs for Indigenous K-12 students?
No, digital literacy was a funding area that we had in the past. We no longer have that. I would say a close one is online safety. If the digital literacy program is around online safety for children and for students, we do fund projects relating to that. But digital literacy itself, which is as in like learning how to use the internet, learning how to develop computer skills, that doesn't qualify.
Okay, and I see one here that says, does CIRA have a wish list of projects they'd like to contribute to or see actualized? I would say no. Our wish list is the community's wish list. Obviously, we wish we could do more. That's our wish list, actually, is that we wish we had more than $1.25 million to fund. One interesting way that we've shifted from that is a special project that we did this year funding National Capital Freenet for community Wi-Fi here in Ottawa. That was a special project outside of our regular grants program, serving different communities. But our normal day-to-day is what is needed in your community under the areas of infrastructure, online safety, and policy engagement. So our wish list is reaching those communities, rural, northern, and indigenous, and students in those particular areas. Beyond that, it's up to you. What if, okay, Kachel,
Yeah.
Caitlin, what if as an individual with an eligible project idea, I partner with an eligible nonprofit to execute the project? Will that count if I myself am the project lead?
Yes. If the nonprofit is the one that's executing the project, then I don't think that's a problem.
Yep, they have to take responsibility for all of the providing all the documentation and the delivery of the project. So if you have that kind of relationship with them, and if you have questions about whether that is eligible even when you apply, you can always include a letter from them explaining what that relationship is and how it will play out in the project execution. Our fiscal is June to May and operating budget given each May. You are saying we would need our board to make one and vote for January to December 24 instead. Yeah, that sounds like a difficult thing, and everybody faces this if their fiscal isn't January to December. So what we often suggest is show us what you actually have, and then ideally, if you can, at least a projection of what you're expecting for the next period. You may not have it in full and it doesn't have to be approved, but we want your sense of what the year's operating budget will be, especially since if yours runs from till May and the review panel is actually making their decisions in June, we would want some picture of what's happening for the remainder of that year. If you already have the May 24 to 25, awesome, include that. So you don't have to create brand new budgets, work with what you have and extend where needs be where possible, obviously noting if it's still provisional. We want to run a project over 2 different communities. So just 3 letters in total is okay. What do you think, Caitlin?
Well, you can certainly provide more, but 3 is the minimum that we're asking for. But if you're working with multiple stakeholders or multiple communities, then please do provide a letter from each of them. That will be really helpful for the panel when reviewing applications.
Okay, we have a question that I think might be building on one I haven't seen yet. If the fundraiser from University Advancement is applying, yes, Caitlin, you're on this one?
Yeah, this has happened in the past where the complication comes in. Okay, sorry, I should just say the question first. If a fundraiser from University Advancement is applying, are they applying under the university process or nonprofit? So they can apply as either, because of course universities are nonprofits. But the problem is when you are applying as a nonprofit, you have to provide more documentation. You'll need to provide organizational budgets for operational budget for the organization. You'll need to provide a board of directors list. You know, the other things that we talked about that nonprofits are required to provide. And if you're applying as a university, you won't need to provide those. So, you know, if you're applying from McGill as a nonprofit, we don't need to see McGill's entire organizational operating budget. So that's why it is simpler for you to apply as a university or college. And also that allows us to see, you know, the credentials for the actual researcher who will be leading the project, like their CV. So that's an important consideration for research projects. So my advice would be to apply as a university.
The academic requirements you posted, is that only for those applications where academics are the lead? If a nonprofit is the lead applicant and partnering with academics, do you still need those requirements? If you're a nonprofit, you apply with the nonprofit documentation required. And as Caitlin said, it's basically because mostly universities are understood as institutions that are functioning at a high level with big budgets, et cetera, and aren't under threat of running out of funding. That changes, doesn't it? Anyway, so the idea being that for they're more established institutions, and that is acceptable. If it's a not, I think the other distinction that has been a historic one that we kind of try to adhere to is the university projects should be research projects by and large, and nonprofit projects tend to be community-led projects. However, there's often kind of a gray area between, and often there's kind of action research being done by academics where they engage with the community. And so that's fine. Academics supply those documents that we need through the university, and then nonprofits have a separate set, because they're largely, to the evaluation panel, just less known organizations. Do the grant funds need to be spent within 1 year? That is our ideal, yes. In rare cases, projects are a bit longer, but we prefer you stick to the 1 year or less. Should projects start no sooner than July? Pardon me?
Sorry, I interrupted you. Keep going.
Okay. Should the project start no sooner than July? Overall duration, up to a year. The funding from CIRA shouldn't start earlier than July. So you might have a project that has multiple sources and a timeline that is different than CIRA's funding timeline that's maybe already underway and like starting in April. But you're asking CIRA to fund a portion or a timeline that would have to start in July or later. You could start in September. So as long as you're starting within like 3 to 4 months of getting the funding, that's great. And then finishing within the year of when your project starts. And then we give you up to 90 days to report. Caitlin, are you wanting to take the next one?
Sure, sorry, I just lost where we are here.
Staffing costs directly related to the project. Go for it.
Do they include a research lead at the college? Yes, that's an acceptable expense. The time that someone devotes to that project is eligible as an expense that CIRA will cover. This is similar to what we said before. Can a college research office apply on behalf of an academic? Yes, I think that's fine. You'll need to indicate the lead researcher on the project, like the main contact for the project, and they'll need to provide their CV as well as a letter confirming that they are employed by that college.
You're on a roll. Go for it.
Go, keep going. Okay. Someone asked, my company is nonprofit and just established in January 2024. Can we be eligible? Yes, if you were incorporated as a nonprofit, you are technically eligible to apply. The one caveat is that while you are eligible to apply, the evaluation panel wants to see that you are an established organization that has the capacity to carry out projects like this, that you have the budget, that you have the organizational capacity. They like to see that you have a history of operating similar projects, so we know that you are capable of carrying out the project. So all this to say is that, like, yes, you're eligible to apply, but it can be trickier for a new organization to demonstrate that they have the capability to carry out a project. That said, one solution might be partnering with another organization, like another nonprofit that does have the track record, who could be your partner in delivering the project. Do you want to take the next one, Marie?
Sure. So elaborating on the budget, wondering about equality on revenue and expenses. Why do we look for that? Because it shows us that your project budget, say it's $85,000, that you are showing the revenue that matches. So say you were asking CIRA for $40,000 of that $85,000, and then you're going to show in the revenue where else that money is coming from. Maybe some of it's coming from your organization or other funders. So we need to see where all of the money is coming from and the specific project expenditures that you're going to make to achieve the results of that project. There is more detail on our website if that isn't a sufficient response, and happy to follow up if there are still questions around that one by email. To clarify if support letters have the same weight across all the 3 branches of application. This one I'm not quite clear on.
Perhaps the 3 funding areas is that's what they mean, I think.
Yes, I wondered if it's that. And yes, the letters of support are equally needed and required across all 3 funding areas. And so, yes, required, I think would be the answer there. If the organization has applied in the past and been denied, does the CIRA offer feedback call or email? We are, good question. We are always happy to try to give the feedback that we can. Usually if it has been denied, during the eligibility review process is one opportunity where you get feedback about alignment and other issues and in relation to the project. So if you make it past all of that, then it's possible to reach out to us once the projects have been decided and announced, and we're happy to share what we know or what we can about the reasons. I will say the biggest reason for not getting funding is because our funding is limited. As Caitlin mentioned, it's 20% or fewer of the projects that come in that get funded because our budget is small. So we try to go as far as we can. There are so many awesome projects out there. So that is often the reason. But if you have specific questions, we're happy to respond. So the onus is on the applicant to reach out to us. Someone asked us to return to the slide where we explained the online safety component. My best piece of advice there would be to spend some time on our website. The same examples or different examples are all there. Caitlin, what's the best place for them to go to see more of those examples?
CIRA.ca/grants. And from there, you can, there's several pages you can check out what we fund, how to apply. The complete list of our project examples is linked there too.
A question about who benefits from the project. If a project benefits a target audience but does not involve their participation, for example, developing policy responses to online harms, is it still eligible? It could be, yeah. I think the project, what you're trying to do within the project could be eligible. We have an awesome example of one last year, I think, well, actually might have been the year before, which was involving the target audience students in their opinions on developing policy responses to online harm. So there are projects where it does involve the target audience, and there may be ones where it doesn't. But having some kind of engagement or awareness, so some way to show that you know why this is needed in the community would help the application. So consider how that would be possible. Who do we contact to run ideas by? grants@CIRA.ca. Absolutely.
I can take the next one.
Sure.
Someone asked, in our budget, do we account for the anticipated grant being accepted, or do we need to show how we'd fund this project without the grant? That's a good question. You would account for the revenue from CIRA in your budget as if you were getting the grant and you're putting together your budget with that in mind. You can also indicate in the column in where you list all your revenue, you can indicate if it's pending or confirmed. So in this case, the revenue from CIRA would be pending.
Okay. Would this grant work for post-production project on a documentary about residential school survivors? You'd have to make a very clear link to how it's contributing to online safety, policy engagement, connectivity. So consider that. It's not for online delivery of material or content. That would come from another source that isn't CIRA. So think about how your project lines up with the funding areas that CIRA has. I know we have a lot more questions and 5 minutes left, so we'll do what we can to get through these, but if you don't hear your question responded to in the next 5 minutes, we will come back to you because we have a record of who sent the questions in, and we can follow up by email. And we'll be doing a frequently asked questions item on our website to wrap this up in the next couple of weeks. Indigenous communities, what does this mean in terms of recognizing as an Indigenous community? So in this case, in a lot of cases, we've had the nation present documentation that is from Canadian government that identifies it as an entity, a First Nations entity. We've had historical documents. So for us, it's any First Nations, Inuit, or Métis community. And if you have any specific questions about the documentation you have, then we're happy to look at it. But whatever your community uses as its constitutional document, that is what we would be looking for. Master's and PhD scholarships, very unlikely. So if that is part of how a project is being delivered, potentially, but I need to see it in the context of the project. Would we fund a seniors program for internet safety? We have done. In fact, we did a really neat one recently where it was elders and youth in a northern community that were teaching each other youth teaching elders how to understand internet access and safety. So yes, but it does need to line up with our priority target beneficiary communities, rural, northern, indigenous, or students. Students being K-12 and post-secondary. Would a nonprofit leading an engagement exercise with community actors to develop policy recommendations on an internet safety topic be appropriate alignment? Yes, I do think that would fit. Does CIRA provide feedback to declined applicants if you ask? Someone is asking for help. Unfortunately, having been hacked, that is not something that we directly do. So that would not be something that we fund. The program can run from September 24 to March 2025, if that's your timeline. Caitlin, you want to pick up some remaining questions?
Yeah. If a university is applying, does it have to be a research project? We have engineering outreach office that provides programs for K-12 students who would like to apply. Yes, it does not have to be a research project. In fact, the year before, we funded a similar project at Simon Fraser University. They did a project for students in the community. That would be acceptable, yes.
Can the project serve only rural population, or will it get more points if it serves all the targeted demographics? We don't recommend that you try to hit everything. Probably targeted is best, and so it doesn't necessarily get more points. It will be reviewed in the kind of scope of what the project is and who it's trying to reach. So as long as it's targeted and focused on some of the target beneficiary communities, that's great. The reporting and payment schedule, the grants are paid out in a single lump sum at the beginning of the project, and we do expect financial reporting at the end.
And that lump sum would be paid in July.
Yes, July, August. Okay, I think we're kind of hitting the point where it's almost 2 o'clock. So shall we wrap it up now? Caitlin, I'll let you do the honors.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone, for attending this webinar. We hope you're inspired to submit some great applications. And for any questions we didn't get to, we'll reach out to you. If you have anything else you'd like to ask, please reach us at grants@cira.ca. And you can check out our website, cira.ca/grants. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye.